All right, all right, all right. We are live. Very warm welcome. Good afternoon, or well, good evening, I guess, depending on from wherever you are dialing in. It's time for another freshly squeezed episode of PKs on Air. Actually, the second last for Christmas. Yeah, it's that time of the year already. Crazy, I know, but I guess some of us are kind of thankful that this crazy 2020 is somewhat coming to an end. Not sure how you guys feel about it, but I think, well, I wouldn't say it can only get better because, well, I think that's, whenever there's something bad happening, there's also something good happening. And I think it has been a bit of both throughout the year. However, I guess for all of us, it was certainly different. Anyhow, sadly, I have to say that Dominique can't make it today. So Domi, get well soon. She has a bit of an injury, so yeah, you have to bear with only me. Wherever you're watching from, if you fancy just joining the stream, send me a quick message on Twitter, ideally, or wherever you are. I'm happy to get you in for some spontaneous live kind of Q&A. We originally had planned to talk a bit about content marketing campaigning, and Dominique wanted to kind of outline and highlight a couple of things in regards to things that we think make a campaign actually successful based on, I don't know how many hundreds, probably thousands of campaigns we have been doing ever since 2014, I believe, is when we started like the dedicated team. However, I am probably the wrong person to talk about that, so that's most likely not going to happen. Hi Mariano. I don't think that's going to happen. So I decided we're going to change the agenda, right? So since it's all me, I can do whatever I want and whatever I please, which is not always a good thing, but I would imagine you just have to live with it, because there has been quite a bit of things happening in the last, 5 days now. For those that kind of live under a rock, then you might have not noticed, but I think everyone by now hopefully has, that Google has been rolling out what is called another, well, I think, and also the first ever since May earlier this year, another one of their core updates. So yeah, it's that time of the year again. Google updating parts, or well, single, multiple, we don't really know, parts of their ranking algorithms, which seems to cause quite a bit of movement and shake up in the search results kind of on a global scale. So I decided we will be talking a bit about that because that's very timely. And well, I'm sure that at least a lot of you kind of start poking around, trying to understand things, trying to potentially spot patterns if there are any, or just kind of ramble about the fact that it's not so very nice that they're doing this kind of straight before the Christmas season or Christmas holidays. Actually, not necessarily a season. The season is probably already running for quite a while. Anyhow, I don't necessarily agree with that. I feel if you have an issue with a kind of a core update, then that's probably more down to poor planning and also somewhat execution even beforehand. And I think if you now working with, a consultant and agency and whatnot that needs to change strategy due to a core update, then maybe that's not the right person or company to work with in the first place. That said, be kind of happy to see your opinions, takes, thoughts, questions around that. That would be lovely and much appreciated. Otherwise, you will be having me rambling and sharing a couple of things that I've been seeing for the next couple of minutes at least. Before we get into this, quick housekeeping. As always, we have the recap as well as the show notes, also the video kind of to watch for you at whenever you feel kind of it is convenient for you to do so. Over at pa.ag/notes, you can just poke around there. There's also a bunch of follow-up resources and links that we kind of discussed during the last episode, but it's not only the last episodes, but actually kind of an archive. So yeah, go there, pa.ag/notes, if you have missed any of the previous episodes. Also, of course, this one, so I will be discussing a bit of data that some of the companies and tool providers out there put already out. We will be linking them, as always, from the recap. So if you want to kind of start playing with the data by yourself, then this is where you will actually find that. And that said, if you want to share feedback, have an opinion, have a question, whatever that is, please, by all means, do so. As I said, Dominique is not there, but I'm certainly on Twitter. So BASGR on Twitter is the handle where you can reach me. And from there on, I think what I'm going to do is I just put up the screen share and gonna start with I think actually a topic, or not a topic, but kind of some reads. And I think Sistrix, our friends at Sistrix, were, I think, the first ones that actually kind of brought up some initial kind of analyzes and data. So I think we just start there. Let me just quickly get the screen share up and running. There we go. Yeah. So, yeah. So Johannes, the Jan's Boys, the CEO of Sistrix, kind of early on, December 3rd, I believe it was. This is where Google kind of started, at least with the announcement saying, well, later today we are going to release a broad core algorithm update, blah, 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 blah. So that's the same stuff that you have been seeing probably multiple times by now. Not really helpful, well, except for the fact that they do announce it publicly. Fair enough. But like the resources being shared, kind of all the same all the time. So nothing really overly exciting, I have to say, sadly. But yeah, Johannes kind of started poking around in some of the kind of early data points that he saw. Essentially, and that's a good point. They have this Google Update Radar, which you can use, and I think like most of the tool providers, somewhat have something like it. And of course, they all claim that they have the best one. And whatever, I leave that up to you to decide what you want to use. So SEMrush or SEMrush, this nonsense ongoing debate, has what's called the sensor, and then Sistrix has like their radar and Rank Ranger and Algorithm and whatnot. They all have their own tool that's somewhat just kind of trying to pinpoint and measure volatility in search results, right? So this is what it is. There's also the analyzers linked here, which I'm going to bring up now. And then, so I think, well, if we just go through the post, I think, how do I know if I've been affected by the update? And it's true only for December, but all the updates, if your graph somewhat looks like this, then you're either in trouble, as in this case with littlewoods.com, but or the other way around, right? If it kind of spikes up, then potentially you might have been doing something right altogether. A couple of things and a couple of observations, and this is probably also very important. I probably should say that before we actually go into the data. It is still early, and that means that things are somewhat still in a constant flux and movement. And of course, you can now look at winners and losers, and you can kind of look at their differences to kind of a previous point in time, and then measure like the kind of the change up and down and whatnot, and then can kind of say, well, this is a X% decline, or the other way around, improvement. But understand that this will still probably change, and also that and we're going to talk about that in a bit later, those curves and the kind of the dates as to when the changes were or became visible are different. So in the UK, for example, this graph potentially might look very different in terms of timing. And there were actually a couple of examples shared in another post where that is the case. So understand it's not the end of the story just yet. However, so this, as Johannes pointed out very much correctly, is a change that was somewhat, or like a group of sites that were somewhat expected to be affected. The Google, and I mentioned it, I think, in my in the last episode, in the organic update, we briefly covered the change in regards to the search quality radar guidelines, where it had a section in there that somewhat was specifically focusing on like dictionaries, lexicons, and kind of the likes. So I think it does not come really as a big surprise that some of those sites, in this case, you can see Lexico, Wiktionary, and Dictionary.com, all being negatively impacted by kind of the recent, apparently by the recent update rollout. So yeah, again, that's not entirely unexpected, but that certainly happened. However, there's others that have gained. I mean, you win some, you lose some, right? But as Johannes also said correctly, well, when something loses, something else is usually kind of picking up. So therefore, again, not entirely unexpected. There is, and that's quite interesting. So this is like what Johannes described as like a reshuffling, and like for some that might feel a bit random. And again, I would not jump into conclusions just yet, but so this is the kind of comparison for Amazon with their specific top level domains, and you can see quite an interesting movement here. So equally winners and losers in a kind of a form of a list, relatively long list. So if you want to poke around in some data points, again, what happens is they just compute difference, visibility, 30, 11, 7, 12, and then like what's the change, and then it's like sorted by highest percentage. So nothing super crazy. So therefore, that's something and the starting point if you kind of want to get into it. There's a couple of other shares that I quickly wanna go through as well. So in the post over at Search Engine Land, I believe it was. Let me quickly try to bring that up as well. Yep, there we go. So in the post over at Search Engine Land that of course Barry Schwartz put together, and that also came out on the 3rd, is, well, next to a couple of timings, what is interesting. Oh, so that's the wrong post. Oops. Then it was the second one. Where is it? Let me see if I can find it. There were 2 actually. Yeah. In the I think it was in the initial post. So there we go. So that was an update on the 7th. So actually from yesterday, what was quite interesting is there's a bunch of, like, and I mentioned them, or some of them, kind of screens and volatility comparisons from not only Sistrix but also kind of other vendors. Again, pick whatever you like. But what's quite interesting to see, well, of course, and that's good because then it's quite clear that it's not like a tool mistake. So probably also good to just not rely on one single tool, but usually use at least 2 or whatever to compare if just an impact might be just a processing error or something like that. However, and this is like, so this is like Rank Ranger, and then we have SEMrush, where, and this is probably well, I would argue not really useful. However, I generally like I'm trying to phrase it nicely. So what I really like is the breakdown by category, but like there's literally no difference. So I mean, except for point something, like they're all crazy volatile, right? So I appreciate the effort there, but I would say that doesn't necessarily really help. Marcus Tober from Search Metrics kind of said or put out like a bit of comparison in terms of May core update versus the ones that have been affected now again. So let's say, so in this case, for example, Spotify had lost roughly 15% in the May update, but did not, at least till today or till yesterday, I suppose, kind of regain that, right? Versus if you would look at something like, I don't know, Rakuten, like an e-com or retailer, 27% loss, but at least 16, roughly 17% kind of a recovery. So some, apparently, I'm not sure if we should even talk about a recovery, but at least for some there's more significant movement than for others, where like Pinterest, for example, lost 21 and lost again roughly 4 and something. So not necessarily because you have been affected in May, that means that you now are affected again, neither positive or negative. I guess both ways can, but do not necessarily have to be the case. So that's that. In regards to what's going on the core update front. So again, still early. Maybe a couple of more practical advices in regards to that as well. What is interesting is that opposite to initial posts, they still did it before the holidays. I don't think this is like a really huge big of a deal. I mean, of course, when you lose, you probably argue differently, but hey. 2 things about timing. That post is in German, sorry for that. So Christian Kunz over at SEO Südwest, what he kind of put out, similar kind of aggregation of news, but there's one thing that is interesting and that's worth mentioning, if I can find it still, is that so that there's already kind of changes or visibility changes, at least. So this is based again on Sistrix graph data before the official announcement on the 3rd. So, well, there could be various reasons for it, but I just kind of wanted to point out that not necessarily only because Google is saying something that at this point in time something happens, then that necessarily has to do with it. We could have observed that in the past. I mentioned a couple of times when I was kind of putting out tweets in regards to, let's say, the evergreen Googlebot being updated to something else, that you would already have seen those kind of new crawler versions being out in the wild for quite some time, and way earlier than what the kind of official announcement date would look like. Also, there is a relatively big list over at the Pathinteractive website, which I think Lily Ray compiled, yesterday. So again, it's just the comparison of before and after. This case more centered around the US. So if you're doing any kind of work in the States, then that's something there. And then she kind of also compiled, and that's a bit more helpful than what we've seen before, like the percentages on average per category. And they would say that travel and tourism apparently for the US right now, again, if the update is finished and there's no implications, kind of impact afterwards, then that would be the final numbers. But then you would say that travel and tourism has potentially been less affected this time than, I don't know, finance or groceries or whatever. So yeah, and then same for losing categories, and there's a whole bunch of like winning domains, total, losing domains, percentage, etc. So yeah, if you want to play with some numbers, and there's also even kind of copy that you can make in your very own Google Sheet to kind of compile and play with it, then by all means, feel free to do so. I wanted to get started on a bit more practical advice. So I think what people still kind of mistakenly take for granted is that you can or will, when you change something, recover from a core algorithm update. I think what needs to be said and clarified is that, well, essentially, as the name already suggests, it is a change to one or multiple, I would say, just for the sake of it, core components of how Google is compiling and then, of course, returning ranking data. So if they would change fundamentally something for whatever reason, and they have kind of in the past believed in that to be more significant, and now they would probably give this 1 factor or something, less of a weight, that would mean that, of course, the results change, which is what we can observe. And I'm not saying they did it that way. I'm not saying they only did it for one thing, but probably for a multitude of things. Anyhow, it does not mean that if you then start reworking parts of your site or recreate parts of your content, that all of a sudden you will go back to where you have been before, right? This is not comparable to a penalty, manual action, that sort of thing, because it's fundamentally Google believing in something else that's more important for rankings, right? And that means, well, there's just no reverting back to something, to a previous stage. So this is probably very important. Keep calm, watch the data. I would suggest for at least a couple more days. I would imagine that certainly might make sense to kind of poke around a bit deeper next week, because then things should have settled. But by now, I still feel that it's a bit too early, kind of to really come to conclusions. Of course, what you will observe is, and this is no surprise, I would imagine, because Google has been kind of going into that direction for weeks, months, you could argue even years. You will observe that things such as EAT, or the more broadly speaking things that somewhat look more, well, that look as it has an impact on better user experience, that sites that do well in those kind of areas, that they potentially have gained, and others similarly that didn't, that they might have lost, right? And this is no surprise. So I think you do not need to be a prophet in that regard. That EAT, fast loading sites to an extent, and just generally good UX will again be something that people at some point will claim has had an impact on core. Because obviously, again, and I think also some of my well-respected colleagues have been saying that in the past, Google doesn't want to rank the site that does best SEO, but it's best for their users, right? So I think this is what it goes down to. Second topic, which kind of ties in quite nicely, which is something that we have been seeing Google communicating quite aggressively, not necessarily aggressively, but quite significantly in various fronts, various channels, I'd almost say, is the core web vitals. So Google's kind of approach to faster loading websites, and then using this set of metrics for kind of a better understanding. And ultimately, this is now come March going to become, and again, I put it in quotation marks here, it's going to become a ranking factor, whatever that really means, right? So a couple of things and a couple of thoughts around that, because, I mean, again, also in the past, we have been talking about this. It's not fundamentally new, but I just want to quickly summarize a couple of things that only made it to light in the last week, I'd say, roughly a week. And also because I'm currently working on a deck for the SEJ Summit, so Search Engine Journal's very own e-summit, which is taking place in January, I think 12th to be precise. And I kind of did a bit of like a deep dive research on some of the things that I wanted to cover. And meanwhile, 5 days ago, so yeah, end of last week, there was a post that kind of came out on the Google site, and it had a couple of things around core web vitals, page experience type of questions, right? So there's not all of this stuff is brand new, so we do not need to go through all of that in detail, but there's a whole lot of debate around AMP, so kind of accelerated mobile pages, and people asking like, what if, do they by default meet like those recommended thresholds? That goes back to the question of like, if you recall the Web Vitals have like those certain thresholds that you can see on the website, and that you can also see on in Search Console help, where they would tell you, like, when they score it into like good and needs improvement and poor. This is all obviously done with ranges and thresholds. So a lot of questions kind of go back to, like, if I'm doing AMP and using the AMP framework, so does it even apply to me? I'm not going to go into that direction because I find it incredibly boring. But there's something that really kind of made me think, and that is here. No, where is it? Even further down. There we go. Yeah. So is there a difference between desktop and mobile ranking? And the answer was, at this time, using page experience as a signal for ranking will apply only to mobile search. And that I found really interesting. Wouldn't say strange, but surprising for sure. I did apparently mistakenly expect this to be the case for desktop as well as for mobile alike. However, please note that it says at this time, so that does not mean it's never ever gonna change. However, yeah, again, I was a bit surprised by the answer. So, because in a nutshell, what it means is that essentially, like, all of this kind of optimization work that you're doing, even more so now, probably should be centered around mobile. So this is not a surprise, because apparently it has a direct impact. However, then keep in mind, and please don't do that, but don't like go into the way and say, well, you know what, like desktop is then, because it doesn't have an impact. I don't care. I would go crazy on my desktop side again. I kind of bloated up with all the like split testing JavaScripts of this world and whatnot. What you should not forget is that still they are going to collect crux data, so the field data, and that will of course continue to be, at least there was no difference, so for desktop as well as for mobile, right? So even if only mobile somewhat has a direct impact on search results or on mobile search, doesn't mean you do not have to worry about desktop alike, right? So it's still, like, in my mind, it's still that you need to do both. However, I found that quite interesting, that they kind of go there and say, well, maybe mobile is more important. Another question that I really found interesting, and I kind of have an idea where it comes from, is what can site owners expect to happen to their site, to the traffic, if they do not hit Core Web Vitals performance metrics? And the answer reads, it's difficult to make any kind of general prediction. We may have more to share in the future when we formally announce the changes that are coming in effect. Keep in mind that the content itself and its match to the kind of information a user is seeking remains a very strong signal as well. It goes back a bit to what I was saying earlier, right? We don't know nothing. We don't know how much of an impact this entire thing is going to have. And Google is certainly not going to give us much of an idea. I think it was the same in the past where people were like saying, well, you now need to kind of, HTTPS is this crazy strong signal, you need to switch to HTTPS. And also even earlier, like with web performance as kind of a ranking factor in general. Those are, and I'm sure this is the same here, at least in the beginning, those are minor factors. And I'm not saying they're not important, don't get me wrong. I'm a freak when it comes to web performance, and I really, like, I hate to wait, but overall, it will be only one part in kind of a bigger system, or in like one part of the puzzle, if you so will. So that means really, I think if you do not hit those thresholds that I was mentioning earlier, it's not about necessarily, it's not going to be a problem, I would imagine. So let's say one of the thresholds is at 2.5 seconds, and you come in at 2.6 or 2.7 or even maybe 3. I mean, this is all still slow, but what I'm trying to say here is that this point something difference is probably not going to be a deal breaker. But if, of course, it's instead of 2.5, it's 25 or even 5 or 10, that might be a problem, because what I suppose is going to happen at some point is at least that it will carry kind of negative weight, right? But I guess we shall see. However, I would not be overly kind of obsessing with reaching thresholds and ranges. It's similar to in the past when we had this one single metrics, like this page speed insight score, and you would try to kind of go from like I recall 97 to 100, and it just literally didn't make any stupid difference. However, you invested quite a lot of time and money alike, and it was just not worth it. There was no return to that. So don't overly obsess with the numbers itself. Just make it fast and as fast as you can, and you would usually probably kind of start hitting those thresholds in the first place. Then I quickly wanted to share one tool which I really enjoy, which is so Addy Osmani from Google kind of built a compare tool for sites, and you can compare URLs across desktop, tablet, and phones. You can see it here in the video. It's free. It's really handy. Let me make it a bit bigger. There we go. So you can just enter any kind of domain or domain URLs, basically. Both works, and then you have something like this. It starts reading and getting the data, and then you have like in a comparison table, which is really nice if you want to put stuff next to each other, free of charge, super helpful. And the last thing, because that's somewhat tying in quite nicely, it's a bit of an older post, actually, end of October, by none other than Tammy Everts of one of the tools that I really love, SpeedCurve, on their blog. She put up quite a massive post, one of the most comprehensive ones that I've seen yet, on dealing with cumulative layout shift and kind of, how has it been measured, how does it work, how to use it, and whatnot, and how also like what are the differences there in terms of measurement, right? So this is, by the way, those thresholds that I mentioned earlier. So in this case, it's the threshold or the range for CLS, right? So everything like up to 0.1 is fine, 0.25, well, there's improvement, and higher than that, it's going to be a disaster if you're so well. And then like how you can measure it and whatnot. But what's really interesting is if you kind of drill down and scroll down a bit further, is this table here, where that it kind of analyzes on how conversion rate actually drops as kind of the CLS score is kind of getting lower. So this is super interesting if you kind of need to kind of come up with a business case or anything like that, and Google's word isn't good enough for your management, then I would imagine this is something that you can absolutely use to kind of make a case for that. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff like in here. So it's like a gold mine in terms of in terms of data, and then also that's something that I'm getting asked quite a lot. So why, and this is not only for CLS, but like why CLS numbers might be different across tools, right? So there's a bunch of different things. There's a bunch of different things that are important to understand. I think first and foremost, the fact that there's synthetic testing and then there's real world data. So the one is kind of in an isolated, predefined environment. The other one is actually what really happens in the real world, as the name suggests. So that already in itself can be very different situations. Then of course, if you look into stuff such as like browser versions, devices, but also CPU and potentially CPU throttling, etc., etc. So those are all somewhat things that can impact measurement and the results. And also with the team, we have been discussing a similar situation actually just the other day, where one of my colleagues was saying, well, it's super frustrating because the data points are so different. What are we going to do? And I think just kind of general rules here is that it gets more accurate when you do it on the command line versus when you would do it in the browser. So if you run like any Lighthouse testings, I would strongly recommend you go command line and then use that interface, because it's still easy, right? You just type in Lighthouse and then the URL or domain that you want to kind of measure against, and then that's it basically. So relatively straightforward. and don't use just one single run. Make sure that you kind of rerun a couple of times, and then you kind of take the average from there. I think this is probably most precise, or most accurate way to do it. I would suggest. So this is something that we've kind of been doing quite frequently in the past. And yeah, I think this is super important, but sometimes it's just frustrating. So one kind of workaround could be that there's this report viewer that you have, which is kind of hosted on GitHub, so Lighthouse report viewer. So what you can also do if, for example, kind of your clients are like, well, I can't reproduce it, I don't see it. Like you can, when you've been doing a test, you can export the results into kind of a JSON object file, and then you can share the JSON object file, and that can be just drag and dropped onto the report viewer, and then you have the numbers there, and you can even play with the result in the proper way, and then kind of click through the report. It's a bit easier than just doing like screenshots and whatnot. So that might be also something that can certainly help. And yeah, I think this is just important to understand that this, like, not everyone will be able to reproduce the same thing at any point in time. Right, so that's that for web performance and core web vitals. There's, as I said, it's going to be a pretty big session I'm going to be doing together with Bartosz Goralewicz from Wonderly at the SDJ Summit. So if you want to kind of have a sneak peek, then feel free to come by. Also, I did a talk on that at the Search Seekers, which is kind of a side project webinar thing from the guys over at Rising Media that is usually running SMX. So there's also a video recording available. So if you want to kind of revisit that talk, I think it was 45, 50 minutes, so quite a long one with a lot of detail, I think, then that's also available for you guys to kind of revisit. Or, as always, if there are any kind of specific questions, or you would need like an opinion on implementation or help with something you can't solve, we are there, happy to help. Just kind of drop us an email, or find me on Twitter, hit me there, and I get back to you, and then we see how and if we can actually assist. Yeah. You are, anyways. You know what I meant. So that said, enough for one day, enough for today. Final quick announcement for last week. So I hope, well, of course, that Dominic is going to be back, but we will be having 3 fantastic guests joining us for, well, the last episode of the year. Bit of a Christmas celebration, a lot of discussion around search, what has happened, what is going to happen, etc. I will be joined by, of course, our very own Dominique Seppelt. I mentioned that already. Then there's going to be Julia Rimmel, also Peak Acer, that kind of is more from the paid search side. So I thought we kind of spice it up with a bit of a mix here. We will be having Arnold Hellemans as well as Nick Wilson on the stream as well. So it's going to be fun. I'm curious if we make it in an hour or not, but we shall see. So that said, I wish you all a fantastic remainder of the week. I hope it was helpful. Any other questions, feel free to kind of drop me a line, as I said. And with that, we are over and out. I see you all next week, 4 p.m. German time on Tuesday.